Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this chunky boy is a Dell XPS L701X from late 2010. From what I've read, the base model cost for one of these laptops was $949 though once configured to pack a little more power, you could have expected to throw over 1,000 of your chosen currency at this thing. It seems that the owner of this one did exactly that back in the day, and in this video we're going to see if it still has the power to do, well, anything in 2020. I paid £150 for this albeit slightly damaged XPS or Extreme Performance System to use its full name. That's about €163 or just shy of $200 at the time of this video. For that I got a Core i7-740QM, a quad-core 8-threaded chip with a clock speed of just 1.73 GHz but a turbo frequency of 2.93. That isn't bad at all, to be honest, and in keeping with the usual reality of these old machines, the processor will have aged better than the graphics card, but we'll get onto that in a moment. In pairing with our processor we have 8GB of DDR3 and a 1TB hard drive. Back in 2010, this would have made its owner very happy, I'm sure, especially if they were keen on video editing. As a side note, I'm not sure where else I can fit in this compliment about the quick access touch bar here, so I'm going to mention it now. Now despite its features, this machine isn't quite top of the range, as there was still room for improvement. For example, buyers could choose to opt for an i7-840QM instead, which I don't think would have really made much of a difference over this chip. I do believe 16GB of RAM was a choice for those with bottomless pockets too, as well as a Blu-ray drive and a GPU and screen upgrade. This is where we get to the bits that haven't aged as well. For starters, and despite its huge 17.3 inch diameter display, the screen is only 1600 by 900. Again, I believe there was an option to upgrade to a full HD display from the factory. Now 1600 by 900 isn't too uncommon of a resolution to find on laptops of this age, even ones that were considered high-end. I don't mind it at all on smaller displays, but here it's definitely more noticeable. It is however nice and bright with decent saturation. Furthermore, the screen resolution sort of makes sense when you take into consideration the graphics card. It's a 3GB GT445M. The best option you could have had back in 2010 was a GT555M, but again I don't know if the difference between that and this is going to be all too significant in 2020. They are both likely to struggle. This is soldered to the board as well, so no chance of an aftermarket upgrade unless we use an external GPU. I'll see if I can do something to get that working for another video using my cheap external GPU adapter, which can be problematic to set up, so I'll have to dedicate a day or two to mess around with it. So let's get into some tests. Firstly, I should mention that I ran these with the laptop plugged in. The seller told me it had a new battery and I don't disbelieve them at all, but in typical old, hot and huge laptop fashion, it lasts for about an hour under heavy usage. Firstly, let's get to the Cinebench R20 test and see how the processor holds up. Now I wasn't sure what to expect, but the CPU doesn't score all too well here. This seems a little low, but it is a first gen mobile i5 after all, and honestly general usage with this machine feels fine for the most part, though the overall experience is let down by the 5400 RPM hard drive. I'd certainly recommend an SSD upgrade if you buy an older laptop like this. There is also space for 2 drives inside this thing, so even adding an SSD as a boot drive and keeping the other one for storage wouldn't be a bad idea. Let's torture ourselves now with some gaming tests. As you can see, Cyberpunk 2077 is running nicely in GeForce Now. Yeah, a service like GeForce Now or Google Stadia is essential to play those more demanding games. Let's see what we can run directly with this hardware though. In CSGO, I noticed that the background defaulted to Ancient. At first, I thought this was the suggested spec preset for this laptop. That being said, CSGO probably performed the best today out of all the games we looked at, with 900p and low settings. I made the mistake of trying to play with the laptop's mouse pad, hence why the gameplay is worse than usual. An external mouse is definitely the way to go, as the mousepad locked up almost constantly. CSGO is more CPU intensive and it's not too concerned with our graphics hardware, though the GT445 is still the limiting factor. and this can be said for all of today's gameplay tests. Fallout 4 defaulted to the low preset as well with 900p. Before I started the benchmark run, it was clear that this was too much for the old beast to handle, so before measuring the frame rates and frame times in MSI Afterburner, I dropped things down to 1280 by 720. This did help keep our average frame rate at about 30 FPS, but there were still a lot of drops here and there which would be detrimental during those intense combat situations. I wasn't really doing anything here besides walking toward the first main town you encounter as part of the story, which is Concord. All gameplay was recorded externally with a capture card as to not affect the performance, so what you see here both visually and frame rate wise is pretty much exactly what you'll get. Allow for a little bit of compression through YouTube, and yeah, the games do look a bit sharper than this. I almost forgot Crysis, but I decided to go back and test it for meme's sake. Can the XPS run Crysis? Well, 30 FPS is sort of playable at the native 900p screen resolution, even with the high preset. I remember my grandparents' PC back in the day had something like a Pentium 4 and 6600 GT inside. It was an expensive desktop PC years ago when they bought it, and I think I tried the Crysis demo a couple of times with about 15 frames per second. I got quite far in the demo even with a super low frame rate, and it's that memory branded onto my brain that has made anything higher than 15 FPS in Crysis seem playable to me. Okay, maybe not quite that low, but I tend not to mind a lower frame rate as much here because of that. From a wider perspective though, this isn't probably going to be playable for most people, especially when you encounter frame dips in the later levels, and yeah, they really do start to occur as we move toward the beach. I can only imagine how the Ascension level will fare on this hardware. Moving on to PUBG then, and that will run as well, albeit with 70% of 720p, so about 896 by 504. That doesn't sound brilliant, but I guess it's sort of bearable on this 17-inch 900p display. The frame rate is a little harder to deal with. As a competitive online game, the higher the frame rate the better, so drops to the low 20s and beyond are going to see you get wiped out on a regular basis, especially if you are playing in first person mode, but with a low frame rate like this I'd recommend third person. Finally then we have Skyrim Special Edition. This is the remastered re-release of the title, and it actually runs with at least 30 FPS to my surprise. This is at 720p with the low preset and anti-aliasing off, so it's not brilliant, but it is native 720p for what that's worth. The first port of call was to head to Riverwood, as this usually tanks our performance, but things held up pretty well overall. In conclusion then, this Dell XPS has not aged well because of the whole GPU getting older quicker than the CPU thing that is often the case. It's still the theme of most modern machines as well, unless they are running integrated graphics, and it's even more of a problem when the graphics card or graphics chips are soldered onto the motherboard and can't be upgraded. External GPU solutions are available if you have a machine with the right port, or you can get one of those mini PCIe external GPU adapters, though they don't always work or they can be very awkward to get working. I might give that a go if it's possible, as the i7 inside this thing still has more to give, but how much more? Well, I'm not too sure, but there we go. All that's left to say is if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like on it down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know what you think of this machine in the comments down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.